Hi everyone, Sabrina here from Scrappy Tales Crafts, and today I'll be showing you the 5 cards that I created with the January 2019 Hero Arts card kit. So for card 1, I wanted to create an easel card where the easel is actually the card base. I saw a few people do this and I thought it was really pretty, so I'm going to show you my take on it. But before I do that, I'm going to stamp and color the bucket image and then one of the flower bunches from the stamp set. I do use my Copic markers. The caps are off to the side if you want to color like I am, but believe it or not, these are the only 2 images that I color for this card. So when it comes to the easel, I noticed a lot of people were creating chalkboard cards, which of course was my initial thought, and I'm late in the game, so I have to come up with something different because I don't want you guys to see a card that you've already seen, and I don't want to copy anyone. So even though I had a similar idea, I don't want to, do the same card. So instead of doing a chalkboard, I'm going to do a burlap board. So I found this burlap paper in my stash, and I'm going to poke a hole towards the top of it, and then I'm going to grab brad. At first I thought I would use a pink heart brad, but I end up using a purple heart brad because that matched my flowers. So I also take some pink twine and I kind of just stabbed the brad through the twine and it ended up working somehow. And then I stabbed the brad into the hole that I created in my paper. And then we're going to come back to that. Basically, I want this to look like I'm hanging a sign from the burlap board. And I created the sign from the die that cuts out the window on the storefront that came in the kit. And now I'm going to stamp out "You're beautiful, I love you," and I'm going to emboss that with my gold embossing powder. By the way, that little contraption is a handmade static tool. I just used cornstarch, I believe, and put it in like a pantyhose sock, and it actually works great. Okay, and so now I'm coming back to my twine. I'm going to tape down the ends so that I can then tape down my sign, which I've already removed the double-sided tape behind the sign. Now I will remove the double-sided tape that is holding down the twine. And I will just glue that right on top. And I think that looks like a sign. Alright, and then I wanted to create a shaker card. So I freehand cut this frame just with my trimmer. I'm going to use my art glitter glue and glue some acetate behind it. And then just cut around the acetate. And then for the quote-unquote sequins, I actually use paper die cuts, and all of these little hearts were cut from multiple different dies, so I can't really think of all of them right now. Basically, they're all hearts within a big heart that cuts out multiple hearts. I know that was a lot of hearts, but you can easily substitute the hearts with sequins. Right there I just added some clear seed beads because I thought that looked nice, and it has that shake sound, which I love. I added some double-sided tape, foam tape, and I did a double layer of that. And now you can see me shaking it. I actually put too many hearts in there, so it was kind of clumping in some areas, so off camera I take a lot of those hearts out, and you can see there is an ugly yellow heart in there, and I don't know how that got in, but that was bothering me for so long. At first I was like kind of embracing it. I was like, well, there's a yellow heart, like one of a kind, but then I was like, no, that has to go. So a lot of those hearts, like about half of them, I take out. Alright, and then we're going to add that little flower pot. I add foam tape on the bottom of it and then regular glue on the top that's overlapping the shaker part. Then I'm going to add some double-sided tape to my burlap and tape that down onto my easel. And so now I'm creating the card base. So I scored another 110-pound Nina card that I cut from the easel. I scored that about 1/2 inch, and then I add glue to the top part of the score line, and that will create your card base. You can see it easily opens. I do put score tape instead of the glue. I think that holds a little bit better, but here you can see I'm shaking it, and it shakes pretty well here, but Like I said, I do take out some of those hearts, and there's the final picture. Okay, for card number 2, we're going to create a watercolor card. So I'm taking my Marvy markers, and basically these are just watercolor markers. So your Zigs, Artezas, Distress Ink watercolor markers, those should all work if you don't have the Marvy. Even Tombow I think would work. But basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a brown marker and inking up the storefront like I would with a normal ink pad, and then I'm taking a blue marker and inking up the stamp with it for the roof of the storefront. And then I took those same markers and I scribbled them off to the side where my craft sheet is, and I use that to pick up some of the pigment and color in my storefront. So once you add water, obviously the watercolor moves. I really like these markers in particular because one side is a bullet nib and one is a brush nib. So the brush nib is really nice to ink up stamps. I have these markers because I watercolor with them with my art impression watercolor stamps. So I'm basically, if you're familiar with those stamps, I'm doing the exact same thing with this kit. And yeah, so that's why I have the markers. But anyway, I like the bullet point because I can go back in and add the detail in like I'm doing here. Some of that detail gets lost when you add water on top of it and it fades away. Sometimes that's like what you're looking for a no-line watercolor effect, for example. But sometimes I do add back in that detail. And I really can't explain how I watercolor. I think it's easier to watch what I'm doing and you can try to figure out. I really don't have a set method as to how I watercolor. I kind of just build color and build contrast, because if you constantly try to do one section like you would with a Copic, it's not going to work because there's water, and water will just suck up the ink and you're not going to get any contrast. So I'm working in little panels like I'm doing on the roof, and then I would just go back and add more contrast where I feel like I want some darker color. My highlight is towards the center, so my darker colors are going to be on the edges of the storefront. And you can see with these panels on the roof, I'm adding the contrast on the edges and leaving the center to be a little bit lighter or brighter. I actually end up not liking this blue roof, and off camera I created a pink roof the exact same way I did the blue one, and then I fussy cut it, and I'm going to pop the pink one on top of the blue, which you'll see later. What I did there was I scribbled down some darker brown marker, and I'm picking that up with my watercolor brush and adding that to the sides of my storefront just to give it some more shading. I think this whole painting took me about 30-35 minutes to complete, which is totally unnecessary. I had the time to do it, so I decided to do shading. But watercolor is really pretty because you don't really have to mess with it for that long of a time. It would have been pretty with just like one layer of shading and then be done. But you can see I went back several times and added contrast. So this is the fun part. I'm taking one of the flower bunches that came in the stamp set and I'm inking it up with my purple Marvy marker and then a green one for the leaves. And then I'm going to stamp it once, twice, and even a third time. And so I'm doing first, second, and third generation stamping all within like the same area. So there's overlapping, which kind of sounds and looks scary like it does now. But once you add the water, it really is a pretty watercolor effect. And I didn't see anyone do this in their videos. So if you have any kind of watercolor markers, I think you could try this look. And it does take some practice because sometimes you can put too much water and it will look like just a big purple blob. But if you leave some of the first generation stamps and barely add any water, you'll keep that flower shape, and people will look at it and their brain will tell them, oh, that's flowers. But it is a very whimsical watercolor flower. And I'm going to show you this several times because it's a lot to explain in a very fast video. So I might do a separate video if you're interested on how I did this in more detail. and I'll go much slower than I'm going now. So now I inked up the water can with a gray Marvy marker, and I scribbled some off to my craft mat, and I'm picking it up with my watercolor brush and adding some shading towards the right side. So my light source is coming up from the top left corner. And then again, if I feel like I lost some of that detail, I take the bullet point nib and draw it back in. So now we're going to do the flower technique. So again, I stamped it once, twice, and then sometimes I do a third generation, but sometimes I don't. Then I can even ink it up again and stamp some more times. And eventually I don't ink up the whole stamp, I ink up part of the stamp. And then I just add a little touch of water, and that gives it that watercolor look. And I really love the outcome of this card, so I end up doing it again in the next two cards actually. So there's my pink roof. I felt like it matched my flowers a little bit better. And now I'm going to add some acetate behind the window. I always do this with my window cards. I just feel like it looks more professional and pretty. And then behind that, I'm going to add some white cardstock, and also on the white cardstock, I will stamp out my sentiment, which reads, "You're lovely," I think. Yes, you are lovely. Again, gold heat emboss. And I actually use the embossing powder that came in the November kit. Okay, and then I'll take some art glitter glue and glue the white panel behind my storefront. I'm going to go ahead and pop that pink roof on top of the blue one. My foam tape is from Uline. It's a pretty cheap foam tape, but it's very sticky. Okay, and then I'm going to take my little die cuts. I actually had to fussy cut these because I was layering them on top of the watering can or on top of the box. So, but it wasn't too bad. I did leave a little white border. So now I am just arranging my flowers to my liking. I did some purple, yellow, and red, I guess pink flowers. And again, I did that all with the same first, second, third generation, and then adding a little bit of water to give it that watercolor look. So I did that with all of the flowers. You'll see in card 3 and 4 I do the same thing, and I'll show you it again. Because like I said, I know it's a technique that's brand new, unless you've been like an art impression watercolorist, because this is originally their idea. And I literally just did it with this stamp set that came in the December kit. So a few of these flowers I'm popping up, and then some I'm gluing straight onto the storefront. Right now I'm adding some yellow twine to the top of my roof. I really liked the yellow flowers, and I wanted to tie in some more yellow. But I think jute cord would also be pretty. Even a white ribbon I think would be pretty. And then I will pop that up with my foam tape. And that will complete card number 2. I think it's really pretty. There is a close-up. Okay, for card number 3, we're going to do the exact same techniques as card number 2. So I'm inking up the bike with a few of my Marvy markers. The tires I used a brown. For the bike I used yellow. And then for the basket, the seat, and the pedal I used a brown. And then I drew in some grass with the bullet point nib on my green marker, just to go on the bottom of the bike so it looks like it's sitting on something and not just floating. And then here I'm going to do the flower technique. I'm going to stamp the flowers once, twice, even 3 times, all within the same area, like very close. Overlapping is fine. And I'm doing this all along the bottom of the bike. I put some flowers in the basket, and I think I put some flowers on the back of the bike. I'm not sure. That might be the next card. But you can see now I'm adding in that water, and that's really when the technique looks gorgeous. You can see that some of the flowers are lighter, some are darker from the first generation. I'm now coloring in my grass. I scribbled some green off to my block. You can also use your block if you don't have a craft mat. And I'm adding even some more green. Then I'm going over my tires. I'm not adding any extra color, just moving that color that's already been stamped. And then same thing with the yellow portion. There's enough pigment from the stamp edges that I can pull it in towards the center and color in the bike. For the basket, I do decide to add a little bit of shading. And I really like making watercolor scenes because you don't have to do any masking. I guess you could have masked the bicycle tire and have all the flowers be in front of the bike, but I kind of think that this looks more organic. You have a few flowers that are in front of the bike and some that are behind. And even though the watercoloring takes quite a bit of time, you're not spending any time masking, and you still get a really beautiful one layer card effect. I'm going to be doing 3 different panels with little scenes on each of them, which you will see, but you could easily just create a 1-layer card very simply and pretty quickly actually, and you will see in my next card that is what I decide to do. What I'm doing now is I scribbled a blue marker off to the side of my acrylic block, and I'm picking it up with a very wet water brush. I made sure to squeeze the barrel so a lot of water comes out, and that makes sure that I'm creating a very soft background without any harsh lines. And I'm making it a little bit darker towards the bottom of the scene and having it fade off into white as I move upwards. And I'm trying to make clouds too. You can't really see, but I just leave portions of white. I don't even color it blue, and that kind of makes it look like there's clouds. And again, if I feel like I lost some of that detail, I go back in with the bullet point nib and draw back in that detail. So for this panel, it's a little bit longer and narrower because I wanted to use the balloons that came in the stamp set. But first I'm going to stamp out the little barrel and this tin can. Again, I use my Marvy markers to stamp up or ink up the stamp. Now I'm going to use the long stemmed flower. I'm using a yellow marker for the flower portion and then a green marker for the leaves. And you will see I'm going to use that same technique where I stamp once and then a second time, all within a very close area on the card. And so I am overlapping. And it really doesn't look like much until you add water. And having the 2nd and 3rd generation stamps gives some lighter portions and some darker portions. And the 1st generation stamps kind of keep their shape more, so you can see the distinct lines of the flower a little bit better than the 2nd generation. And so your eye, like I said, your eye thinks it is a flower bunch, but it does have that watercolor messy look, and I don't think it will be for everyone, but I wanted to show you something different with this kit and show that you can do this technique with these stamps. I had never tried this technique with acrylic stamps. I've always done it with rubber stamps, and it works just the same, just as well as rubber stamps, which I was very pleased with. And if you guys want a more in-depth tutorial on how I'm doing this and better explanation, I'm going to leave a few Art Impressions videos in the description box because this is their idea. They create stamps specifically for this technique, and they have hundreds of videos on how they create the little flowers that they make, and they also create scenes with their stamps. So like I said, I will link a few of their videos down below if you are interested in this technique and want to know more about it. So as I was rambling, I added the water to my flowers, and keep in mind guys, use as little water as possible, otherwise your flowers will just turn into a yellow and purple blob. If you add too much water, you're going to lose those distinct flower lines, and they're not going to look like flowers anymore. So I went ahead and added shading to the tin can and the barrel. Now I'm adding a little bit more of a green color into the grass. And now I will add shading to my balloons. Whenever I want to add shading, I scribble the marker off onto my acrylic block and pick it up with my watercolor brush and add the contrast that way. You can see I'm going in between the blue and the pink. I'm going back and forth. That is because as you add more water, it is difficult to add contrast in. Okay, so for this last panel, I wanted to create a soft background. So I'm doing the same technique I did with the bike and creating a cloud background. I scribbled some blue off onto my acrylic block and picking it up with a very wet paintbrush and adding the blue color onto my watercolor panel. And I'm leaving white blobs that kind of look like clouds. By the way, I am using Canson XL watercolor paper for all of my watercolor cards today. And I decided to add a little bit of a darker blue sky to this panel, and I added some more clouds. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this card. I wanted each of these panels to be popped up onto a pink mat. And by the way, if you want to know the dimensions for this card, I will leave them in the description. I did write them down, so I will leave them down below if you're interested and want to create this card. So now I'm popping up each panel with my foam tape. And for the last panel, I'm going to stamp out my sentiment first. But first I want to heat set and make sure everything is dry before I start to stamp and emboss. And I decide to use the sentiment that says, "Wishing you a wonderful day." And again, I will stamp and heat emboss with the same gold embossing powder from the November kit. I think all of my cards, I stamp my sentiments with this gold embossing powder. I didn't want to use black since there's no other black on this card. And after this sentiment is heat set, I will add foam tape behind it and pop it onto its matching pink mat. And then I will take my horizontal top folding A2 card base and lay my panels over it. And I really like how that looks, so I added some double-sided tape behind each of the panels and taped them down onto my card base. And that will complete card number 3. I really love how this card turned out. I love the cloud background and the beautiful watercolor flowers. So card number 4 is basically just an easier version of card number 3. I created this heart stencil with a scrap of paper that was cut down to 4 by 5 1/4, and then I die cut a heart towards the top of the panel. And now I'm going to ink up my bike the same way that I did in card number 3. I ink up the tires with a brown marker. I ink up the base of the bike with a turquoise marker, and then the handles, the basket, and the pedal I inked up with a yellow marker. And I'm actually not inking up part of the tire, and that's where I'm going to put the flowers in front of. So this way it looks like the flowers are in front rather than behind. This is sort of an easier way of masking where you don't have to cut a mask, but you still end up with the three-dimensional look. So now I am inking up another flower bunch with my purple marker and my green marker for the leaves, doing the exact same technique where I'm stamping first generation, second generation, and third generation stamping. I'm adding some pink flowers to the basket of the bike, and then I will add some yellow and orange flowers on the bottom of the bike. And now I'm placing my mask back over it because I don't want the flowers to stamp outside of the heart, so they are instead stamping on the stencil that I created. And I'm mixing a yellow marker with a pink marker to create an orange color, but some of the stamps I left yellow just to add some variation in color, because once you do a lot of stamping right next to each other, it's very easy for it to look like a blob. So when you add some different colors, it looks better, in my opinion. And here I'm freehand drawing some grass below the flowers, again using that mask so I don't go outside of the heart shape that I want to create with this card. And then now I'm adding my shimmer pen again with the perfect pearls inside of it to create the watercolor effect. And when I add the water to the flowers, I barely touch the flowers, and there's very little water on my brush. If you put too much water on the flowers, it can easily look like a blob of purple or pink, whatever color you use. So just use very little water, or else you will lose those distinct lines that look like flowers. All right, and now we're creating that same blue sky. I scribbled some blue off onto my acrylic block, picking it up with my very wet paintbrush, and I'm adding the blue onto the sky portion of the heart. Again, I made it a little bit darker towards the bottom and faded it out towards the top, trying to create the little clouds by leaving some white blobs. And now I'm taking off the mask, and you can see that it's a really pretty heart shape. And then I'm just going to add my sentiment, which reads, "Wishing you a happy day." Again, stamping and embossing with my gold embossing powder. And I really love how this card ended up looking. It was also the quickest card that I created. I think I made it in about 30 minutes. And I would say that this one is my favorite out of the 5 that I created, and I'm not sure why. I think maybe because it is a 1-layer card, even though I do pop it up and I do add sequins. You could easily paint this straight onto your card base and it would be a true 1-layer, but I really love dimensions, so that is why I popped it up, and I'm adding some of the sequins that came in the December kit just to add some sparkle, and that will complete card number 4. Okay, and for the last and final card, there is going to be a lighting change, so I am sorry about that. I realize it's extremely yellow. I worked on this card at night, and I regret it because natural lighting looks so much better, and I will keep that in mind for future videos, so I hope you guys can bear with me for this final card. I really love how this card turned out, and it's completely different from the other 4 that I created. This one is a vintage style, so what I did was I cut this craft cardstock that I embossed with a brick embossing folder, and then I'm adding vintage photo around it just to age it and make it look old, and then I stamped the storefront onto a wood grained patterned paper, and again I didn't do any coloring on the storefront, so all I'm doing is adding the vintage photo, and that gives it a little bit of shading. I also stamped and fussy cut a separate roof that I stamped onto some red pattern paper, and then I hand die cut and color all of the images for this card off camera. I did use my Copics, so I knew this video was already 30 minutes long, so I left the coloring portion out for this card, but I did go over all of those white edges with the vintage photo because it was very stark white, and the vintage photo just kind of muted it down and again added to that vintage look. So behind the storefront, I'm going to add vellum instead of acetate. And I'm going to use a technique that I saw Tina from Card and Coffee Time, I think. She placed this little bird cage behind the vellum window, and it looks very soft, and it's a really cool effect. So hats off to her. That was her credit. I have to give credit where credit is due, and this was a very genius idea, and I love the turnout. So I'm placing the back window into my MISTI so I know where to stamp, and then I will extend that line on the bird cage. You'll see when I add the vellum window on top, it's a really cool effect. It looks like the bird is inside the store, and you can't really see it unless you look very closely at the card. So now I'm stamping my sentiment. Again, I will heat emboss it with gold embossing powder, and I decided to use the sentiment that says "Be Mine," and I realized that this is the only Valentine's Day card that I made, but I think this kit is really great for Mother's Day and for thinking of you cards. Now I am taping down my brick panel, and you can't really see the bricks in this video, but in the final picture you'll see it a lot better, and it's a really cool effect. I'm also going to tape down the inside window, And then I'm going to pop up my storefront. I also popped up the roof, and I glued it towards the top part of the card base because I wanted to add the bike underneath and in front of the storefront. And then I added the balloons in the window. I'm going to add my hanging plant. I do off camera add another hanging plant. I wanted some more color on that side of the card. And I do add teeny tiny bits of foam tape behind the tires of the bike, which I spared you guys having to see that. And I do pop up the tulip with the crate. And I'm going to finish this card off with a little bit of yellow twine on the roof. I wanted to tie in the yellow that was on the bike. And that will complete card number 5. I love this card because I didn't do much coloring. I just used pattern papers. So this card was pretty fast to make, and I really like the outcome. This is probably my second favorite card. Luckily, I filmed the card showcase the next morning, so you don't get to see any more yellow lighting. You get some nice natural lighting. So please let me know which card was your favorite. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions. Again, I will leave all of the extra products that I used in my description box down below. And thank you guys so much for watching and taking the time out of your day to watch a 30-minute video. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you guys next time. I do have the February Simon kit, so you should see that video shortly. Alright, bye guys.